apparently the libertarian brain that defends Project Veritas doesn't actually end up defending a white guy getting banned for saying cracker. Glenn Greenwald came out with what goes around comes around.
I've not seen the tweet where he is defending you against Twitch on this. Has he?
No, he did not. He said what goes around comes around.
That's all this has been setting up for, in my opinion, is coming when the eventual purge comes. That's what I think.
I mean, that's like the functional equivalent of cheering on, saying that unvaccinated should not go to the hospitals, right? I mean, like his whole brand has been an unwavering, principled stance, regardless of who the players are.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know if Greenwald, but that principle was a bit shaky around the Nathan Robinson Guardian thing too, among some other those substackers, like taking a little bit of victory laps or look at a little bit gleeful at leftists getting banned.
Well, all right, let's.
Well, the thing about that is like Glenn is ridiculous in this issue because like. He knows for a fucking fact that I have been a massive advocate for, BDS protesters and how much of a disgusting erosion of the First Amendment laws that we supposedly have in this country. Whenever you have to sign like that, you have to sign like loyalty to the state of Israel and that you've never actually said Palestinians are human to be a fucking teacher in Texas. Like I think that's insane. And that is a true restriction of freedom of speech.
I just want to be clear so that people understand what you're talking about. There are, I think, something like 20 states in the country, maybe there's more, where to get a contract from the state, whether you're a speech therapist helping kids in public school or whether you're, I don't know, supplying, toilet paper for the state house bathrooms, you need to sign a pledge to say that you will not engage in the constitutionally protected right to protest or boycott Israeli products. There are 20 some odd states that make you sign this. The Republicans tried to push this on a federal level. I think it was Marco Rubio a couple of years ago brought it up in the Senate. And yeah, it's obscene. It's absolutely obscene. And that is genuine First Amendment stuff because, of course, we're talking about the government. So I just wanted to, if people weren't aware of that.
Yeah, he basically said that, Glenn basically said, pro-censorship, liberals being pro-censorship will lead to this. And he basically said banning people for not basically, I'm reading his tweet. Banning people for using the term cracker is obviously demented and repressive, but the ultimate case for reaping and sowing. It is incredibly easy to predict, and many tried warning that banning people like Milo and Alex Jones would inevitably lead to this outcome. So this idea that people are getting banned for saying cracker was inevitably going to happen is a silly one, considering that platforms were incredibly strict on anything that goes outside of the liberal to reactionary, neat little ideological box of conformity for a very long time. You never were able to, you would get clapped as a defender of Palestine regularly, even before Alex Jones and Milo was yeeted off the platform.
I mean, yeah. But I mean, and we should say that 30 years ago, 25 years ago, he was about 30. Barry Crimmins was in front of Congress. The late Barry Crimmins was testifying about pedophiles on AOL when that was a platform, and they had chat rooms, and they were allowing child predators on there. And it got shut down. And you wouldn't hear any arguments at that time, like this is a slippery slope. The fact of the matter is that people can make a difference between peddling, one type of stuff versus another. And those type of assessments are made all the time. And there's inevitably going to be mistakes, like I think Twitch made in your case. And that's part of the process, and that's part of the way that these things develop. And the idea that they're all the same because you're deplatforming a person, and so it's necessarily all the same case, is childish. And it really is less, and I think it's indicative of just his response to you, frankly, it is less about a principled stance and more about like, this is just the methodology he's using to advocate for a certain ideology that he obscures. And I mean,
I wonder if he thinks McCarthyism is a product of, liberal identity politics as well. Maybe that's why it happened. Red Scare happened only because, the left wanted too much censorship.
Of course. I mean, he will use it. I mean, and it's been this is his methodology, and I think it's quite clear. And I will say this though, we're getting a lot of complaints about your fingernail polish, and I think it is very. I think it was very big of us to allow you on.
Thank you. Despite me being weird, weird guy.
A lot of people in the office totally freaked out right now, and that was really funny. And I have to say, also, I mean, I didn't actually think that we would go into this, but I guess we both could not help ourselves. The fact that he took offense that you were saying that he and Jimmy are old, and I will say this. Glenn is, as far as I know, probably about 6 months younger than I, and maybe less, maybe 4 or 5. I think he's maybe not quite hit 55 yet. We are old. I want to make that clear. We're old. 55 is old.
You're a fox, Sam. You know that.
Well, that may or may not be the case. And Glenn is a strapping, young looking fellow.
Young.
Not young, but old fellow as well. And Jimmy, but we're old. You're young. That's just a fact. And I think, it's important for us to sort of just accept it and it's not pejorative. It just happens to be that, like, when you get to be our age, certain things look like you're on our lawn, and it's upsetting to us. But that's,
it is like, it doesn't matter how old you are. If you start freaking out on someone because like a straight male has like painted their nails a color, then that's boomer behavior. Boomerism is a mindset. And
those commercials, like the couple is in like the Home Depot or whatever, and the guy with blue hair, and he's like, you don't have to say anything about the blue hair, and the dad can't help himself. That's the same behavior.
It's pretty shocking. I mean, like, it's not, I gotta say, and I'm not a boomer. I don't think, well, Glenn couldn't be, because he is like 5 or 6 months younger than me. But, even boomers, we've had plenty of people in our generation, in Gen X, who wear nail polish. It just seems like, like a very odd thing to fixate on. But I guess that was what the reach is. Who do you think they're on now? I mean, do you think they just like basically are in competition with Steven Crowder in terms of their audience?
I think that there's a lot of, look, there's a big audience in independent media always that is constantly looking for reactionary content and people to tell them that they agree with them. It's, I think, even better if this is supposedly like a leftist person or a left adjacent person telling a reactionary person that they agree with them. Like, everyone wants to be comforted for their points of view. So, it's certainly a viable way to make money. I think I think it's an immoral way to do so, but that's probably what they're cashing in on. I mean, a lot of these guys, they get fat Substacks, decent amount of money. I know Glenn loves talking about how much money I make whenever that comes up, but like, I'm one person. Like, we don't have a lot of incredibly successful leftist media operations that are independent, We don't even have a lot of leftist media operations in general in comparison to how broad the spectrum of like reactionary content that is readily available on YouTube that is sometimes independent and other times actually backed by the very same institutions, entities, human beings that would back mainstream media outlets that churn that kind of misinformation.
It's pretty stunning what you're talking. I mean, like, we will every now and then hear about somebody that we've never heard about. The last one was this guy, J.P. Sears. I just had a thing. Have you ever heard of J.P. Sears?
No.
He is a conservative, anti-vaccine comic who gets like 2 million views per video he puts out about this, you know, with anti-vax conservative talking points.
Oh, I know. That dude looks hurt. Yo, that dude, oh my God. He looks like such a fucking, that dude is the archetypical Los Angeles failed actor who absolutely fucking was like, oh, there's a target rich environment of suckers here that'll like watch anything I say as long as they agree with me. And like, it's such bottom of the barrel commentary. It's just like, liberals are so stupid. It's like what's that fucking SNL guy that was on with Dave Chappelle in that movie, Jim Brewer or whatever? Like it's his style of comedy where he's like, liberals are like this. And then everyone's like, yes, I agree with that. Thank you so much. It's just, it's the reactionary version of Nanette. And it sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my point was that there's a ton of these guys out there. Now, we here are swimming in drowning in Google money, as most people know, completely drowning in it. But for the most part, there's really a very limited number of people who do this on the left and can actually make a living at it. I was fortunate enough to come off of Air America, and I had an email list, and that was basically the only thing that basically saved me 10, 11 years ago. But for the most part, very difficult to build an audience on the left, whether it's whether it's you're talking about liberals or you're talking about progressives or socialists. It's tough. It happens, but it's tough. And on the right, there's just a lot more money, and there's a lot more, frankly, funding that comes from places like the Koch brothers. Maybe it gets laundered a couple of times through different organizations, and but there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of lost leader attitude on the right that doesn't exist on the left, obviously, because
I don't know why someone who has been a beneficiary of wealth hoarding or the centralization of wealth would turn around and pay for someone to tell them like that's wrong, that entire system that allowed them to make billions of dollars and accumulate that kind of wealth that system needs to be dismantled. They're not going to do that. People who benefit from that are not going to turn around and pay for people to advocate against that.
Even on Air America, the big money was afraid of giving money to Air America and supporting it, investing in it, because the big money, the liberal, centered to the left money, is afraid of populism, because the populism on the left is economic populism. The folks like the Koch brothers or the countless number of billionaires, frankly, that fund these things. Every day you hear about another person who's like $300 million for, to invest in some type of seed thing for online right-wing content. They're not afraid of the right-wing populism because it doesn't threaten their dollars at the end of the day.
They don't criticize venture capitalism.
No. And even when you look at like what, the critique that Glenn has of big tech, he will pay some lip service to the idea of dismembering it, but it really becomes which flavor of big tech is evil, right? Google is evil. PayPal's not necessarily evil. Facebook's not necessarily evil. I mean, even in what's also fascinating to me is like, I remember interviewing him about his book, about the Manichean style of the Bush administration. Good, evil, how childish he thought that was at the time. But now it's effective because it's really deployed as a way of building a brand and these subsidiary brands, whether it's Substack or Rumble or whatever, Callin or whatever it is. And instead of saying there's a structural problem here that needs to be dealt with. And this is the point. It's not that Google is evil or Facebook is evil. It is anything of this size, any enterprise of this size is bad for society. It's not like these specific, individuals there are evil. Maybe they are, but that's irrelevant. It is the structure of these things that needs to be dealt with.
Absolutely. Just like the systemic problems will still persist. And there is a big difference that I always like to point to when we're looking at cultural hegemony, right? Bad behavior and like policing what you would consider to be like bad thoughts and bad attitudes in liberal media is something that a lot of liberals also like to engage in, rad libs. And I criticize that too, to a certain degree, when people are just like, why is there a bad character doing bad things in this movie? That's bullshit. They should always do, human beings should not be complex. They should be arbiters of morality and yada, yada. And I think that's a silly way. And I think that that's bad for art overall. And I don't like that. And I personally don't even think that like these cultural movements actually end up pushing for systemic change. I will admit that. Okay. They're the only time, however, though, that like any sort of cultural artifact, a movie, for example, like Birth of a Nation, can push for some kind of attitude shift is if the material realities already support that. America was already a deeply white supremacist nation. We already have a lot of white supremacist institutions, and then Birth of a Nation happens. That's how you start, that's how you start basically forming an active base for the Klan, right? That can't happen with the opposite. You can't combat material realities and material inequalities by making people watch a movie and then, feel a certain type of way. You can only do that if you are already in the dominant group and that your ideology is baked into all of the institutions and your attitude is reflected in like everyday lives, in our everyday lives, even if people don't recognize it's happening.
So
that's how nefarious it is.
You're saying that these cultural forces can be accelerants, but they cannot be, they can't be catalysts and flip.
Yes. Yes.
I think that's true.
The revolutionary spark can only happen if there is a base of support within the material inequalities, and that there is like already organizing occurring alongside that. It can't do it on its own. No one's gonna watch a movie and be like, all right, I'm fucking Marxist now, and like, and then enough people watch it and then they all become Marxists, and then that's how you form the Vanguard Party. Like, that's not how it happens. It happens at workplaces. It happens through organizing.
And I think that limitations is true for the type of stuff that we do, frankly, as well. Like there has been, because of the nature of, I think, the people who do this kind of stuff that we do, and the economic incentives to sort of inflate our influence in this sphere. I mean, I think you have a much bigger audience, obviously, than we do here. But even there, it is you can influence ideas, but I think ultimately there's no we're not catalysts for broad-based change. That has to happen with people in their real life relationships and interactions and workplace and their relationship to their own work. I the idea that that people are like, we don't have a certain policy because these 5 YouTubers are not behind it is I think a little bit problematic in terms of people's understanding of how this stuff works.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's funny to me whenever people greatly exaggerate like the influence that I have, even when they're like, "Oh, you're gonna get the Democratic Party to not vote for Joe Biden if you keep criticizing him," and I'm like, if I could get people to vote a certain way, Bernie Sanders would be fucking the president. You know, he would have won the primaries. Like, it's not my influence is nothing in comparison to the trillions of dollars of earned media that mainstream media outlets can offer a particular candidate if they want to shift their weight towards them. You know, I don't just mean paid media. I don't mean, I'm using the technical definition here. Earned media is when someone talks about your candidate, for those of you who don't know, in an organic capacity, like, oh yeah, look how crazy it is that Joe Biden won Super Tuesday. That's wild. Like, or leading up to Super Tuesday. I'm talking about how great Joe Biden is. Like, that's earned media versus paid media would be buying ads. They work side by side, but earned media is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think the dynamic is very similar to what you were talking about. Just in terms of where the culture is, we can be accelerants, we can be the reinforcers, we can help a little bit, but it's not happening with any given or even a multitude of YouTubers. It's all just butterfly wings type of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean that like what we're doing is not significant. Don't get me wrong. I think you guys are doing a great job. And I think like trying to break away from the capitalist dogma or even like the center right liberal attitude that Americans have on most economic issues. I think that's really good. But it can't be done individually by YouTubers and Twitch streamers and podcasters. It has to be also accompanied with like on the ground organizing.
And stuff like Matt was just saying, defense against like stuff like Project Veritas. I mean, I think we're most effective when we're just talking about media narratives and where they start. I mean, that's the interesting thing I think about Twitter on some level too, is that much of what's happening on Twitter is really a function of influencing the sense of reporters who are on Twitter as to what's going on in the narrative. I mean, that's the sort of interesting dynamic. You're almost like taking advantage of the myopia that most human beings have, which is like, oh, I heard a lot on Twitter. It must be going on out there. And then you have people who actually have the ability to write like in the New York Times and have a sense of what's happening. That very often cuts the other way because it's all about, somebody at Kenyon College said you can't say this word. And so that's our biggest problem in this country or something to that effect. But
yeah, I hate that. I absolutely hate it because it's like this idea that so many people who fancy themselves to be like white working class whisperers exclusively hyper focus on the exact same kind of culture war bullshit that like reactionary outlets focus on, like Fox News, and think that is the end all be all when it's like a dude living in Western Pennsylvania, his life is not going to change if like a couple students who were maybe even a little heated, maybe a little over the top, and we're yelling at a professor. You know what I mean? Like that's not changing anybody's life. It's just simply a distraction. And they're doing it deliberately. They're distracting you from the main problems. They're distracting you from the reality that the Joe Biden administration hasn't done shit. But even Republicans aren't doing a better job of criticizing the Joe Biden administration. They're still hyper-focusing on made-up narratives like CRT and all this other shit. Why? Because if they were to hold Joe Biden to account, if they truly were economic populists like, Donald Trump presented himself to be, but he wasn't actually, right? They would be hammering Joe Biden on student loan debt relief. Where is it?
Of course.
Where's the student loan debt relief? They would be even talking more about how Joe Biden is currently utilizing Title 42 and trying to keep Title 42 in action to ensure that, asylum seekers who are legally and morally, by the way, seeking asylum within our borders, purging them from the country by using the Donald Trump era CDC restrictions and using this like COVID restrictions to purge them from the country without giving them their their right to seek asylum. That's disgusting.
Same dynamic with Remain in Mexico. You had a court order that they needed to come to a deal with Mexico, but the idea that deals can be sewn up so quickly seems fascinating to me. I mean, I don't know. I will say this, and this actually raises something I was going to talk about today. I didn't get to yet, but there was the Biden administration. They just held one of the biggest sales for auctions for oil and gas drilling leases in the Gulf of Mexico's history. And I think it was in November. And it happened literally just days after COP26.
Because they listen to the scientists, Sam. That's how it works.
And at the time, the administration said that we were compelled to by a court ruling that was in favor of a bunch of Republican-led states that sued to lift the blanket pause that the administration had put on the drilling permits. But apparently, this according to The Guardian, the DOJ, just before the lease, acknowledged that the judgment does not force the government to auction off the drilling rights in the Gulf. I'm not going to, I don't need to read what the DOJ says. That was just what it said. Now, here's the question I have. I wonder, and I'm looking at this, there's also a big fight at the FDIC right now, which, the long story short, there's a Republican Trump-appointed chair of the FDIC, and there's a majority on the board of Democrats. And they're having a big sort of like bureaucratic fight because the Democrats want to regulate the banks harder and want to prevent consolidation. There is the Biden administration that deserves
communism.
Deserves credit for not quite communism, but for antitrust. They're pretty good on it in terms of the administration, in terms of the personnel. That story has sort of broken out into the open because it's pretty high profile. I wonder when I see stuff like this, whether the Department of the Interior is still staffed by a lot of Trump appointed people who, when there's a court order, instead of dragging their feet, race to fulfill this thing before there's because this is a massive, our government has tens of thousands of people who come in with a new administration, or they don't. And we're still a year out dealing with a lot of these agencies that are Trump staffed, and the Biden administration just doesn't have it's just a sheer, it's a difficult operation. I've been trying to get, frickin' pullover hoodies on our merch site for 7 months, and it takes me time to do it. I don't know the answer to this, but
Republicans want it more, and also not only that, but also they don't go against the material interest of their benefactors, their corporate benefactors, and their wealthy benefactors. Like, that's the reality. Whereas Democrats
frictionless
Democrats campaign on systemic problems that they are seeking to solve that are diametrically opposed to the material interests of their benefactors, which is precisely why they have to be the party of incompetence, whereas Republicans can be the party of viciousness and immorality, and openly engage in like racial agitative propaganda, white anxieties, use that as a really effective deflection away from the real problems that the American working class is facing. Whereas Democrats just look like incompetent fools that can only focus on, making sure your favorite TV show doesn't have any hateful sentiment expressed in it, even if it's simply for parody. And I think that is just a really silly, self-defeating way of running, and let alone the reality that Democrats only run every 4 years or every 2 years when they remember that they need to win seats, versus Republicans are running all the time because they have to activate certain key bases within their movement and are consistently hammering on their narratives. Otherwise, how the hell are you going to get a bunch of random people to advocate for tort reform? You know what I mean? Or even school choice. Like these are ideas that they add on to other pre-existing movements that are organically growing, like QAnon. That's why when you see like a QAnon rally, you got like a Republican council member running for a fucking district in like Southern California, literally talking about school choice. But you're at a QAnon rally, and it's like, yeah, Democrats are pedophiles. Also, we should give more vouchers. We should allocate some of this communist public schooling system funds away from these, horrible communist teachers and give them to private schools, religious schools. It's like, well, you just bake that in there so perfectly. And they do this year round. They do this nonstop because they want it more. And also because that's what the benefactors want. And that's what the benefactors want, even if they're actually, giving money to the Democratic Party.
And I do think, there's just a lot less friction between school choice and QAnon than there is between, funding public schools more and wealthy benefactors. I mean, that's just the bottom line. There's just it's not as steep of a hill, I guess. All right, man. Well, listen, I guess enjoy your vacation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna keep making content. Like they're not gonna. It's really annoying because the ban is like really rigorous. Really, like you can't appear on anyone else's streams. You can't basically limits you from hanging out with your friends and your coworkers, which is understandable.
Are you not allowed to see family members?
No, I can see my family members. Yeah, my mom and dad are here right now. They're staying with me, but I'm still gonna keep trucking away.
Over when they heard about the ban?
No, they loved it. They were like, "Oh, great! Like then we will be able to go and vacation." I was like, "Absolutely not."
All right, well, hang in there. Thanks for coming on. It was good to.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
All right, we'll talk to you later.